rushing furiously up underneath their wings with repeated blows, turning them round and backwards and forwards, washing them from head to foot in a tempestuous sea of rapid and unexpected motion. It was, of course, far easier to fly with a wind than without one. The difficulty with a violent wind was to get down, not to keep up. The gusts drove against the under surfaces of their wings and kept them afloat, so that by merely spreading them like sails they could sweep and circle without a single stroke. Jimbo soon learned to manoeuvre so that he could turn the strength of a great wind to his own purposes, and revel in its boisterous waves and currents like a strong swimmer in a rough sea. And to listen to the wind as it swept backwards and forwards over the surface of the earth below was another pleasure, for everything it touched gave out a definite note. He soon got to know the long sad cry from the willows, and the little whispering in the tops of the poplar trees, the crisp silvery rattle of the birches, and the deep roar from the oaks and beech woods. The sound of a forest was like the shouting of the sea. But far more lovely, when they descended a little, and the wind was more gentle, were the whispers among the reeds and the little wayward murmurs under the hedgerows. The pine trees, however, drew them most, with their weird voices, now far away, now near, rising upwards with a wind of sighs. There was a grove of these trees that trooped down to the waters of a little lake in the hills, and to this spot they often flew when the wind was low, and the music likely, therefore, to be to their taste. And even when there was no perceptible wind, these trees seemed always full of mysterious, mournful whisperings, for their branches held soft music that never quite died away, even when all other trees were silent and motionless. Besides these special expeditions, they flew everywhere and anywhere. They visited the birds in their nests in lofty trees, and exchanged the time of night with wise-eyed owls staring out upon them from the ivy. They hovered up the face of great cliffs, and passed the hawks asleep on perilous ledges, skimmed over lonely marshes, frightening the water birds paddling in and out among the trees. They followed the windings of streams, singing among the meadows, and flew along the wet sands as they watched the moon rise out of the sea. These flights were unadulterated pleasure, and Jimbo thought he could never have enough of them. He soon began to notice, too, that the trees emanated something that affected his own condition. When he sat in their branches this was very noticeable. Currents of force passed from them into himself, and even when he flew over their crests he was aware that some woods exhaled vigorous life-giving forces, while others tired and depleted him. Nothing was actually visible, but fine waves seemed to beat up against his eyes and thoughts, making him stronger or weaker, happy or melancholy, full of hope and courage, or listless and indifferent. These emanations of the trees, this giving forth of their own personal forces, were of course very varied in strength and character. Oaks and pines were the best combination. He found, before the stress of a long flight, the former giving him steadiness, and the latter steely endurance and the power to steer in sinuous, swift curves without taking thought or trouble. Other trees gave other powers. All gave something. It was impossible to sit among their branches without absorbing some of the subtle and exhilarating tree life. He soon learned how to gather it all into himself and turn it to account in his own being. "Sit quietly," the governess said. "Let the forces creep in and stir about. Do nothing yourself. Give them time to become part of yourself and mix properly with your own currents. Effort on your part prevents this, and you weaken them without gaining anything yourself. Jimbo made all sorts of experiments with trees and rocks and water and fields, learning gradually the different qualities of force they gave forth, and how to use them for himself. Nothing, he found, was really dead, and sometimes he got himself into strange difficulties in the beginning of his attempts to master and absorb these nature forces. Remember, the governess warned him more than once, when he was inclined to play tricks, they are in quite a different world to ours. You cannot take liberties with them. Even a sympathetic soul like yourself only touches the fringe of their world. You exchange surface messages with them, nothing more. Some trees have terrible forces just below the surface. They could extinguish you altogether, absorb you into themselves. Others are naturally hostile. Some are mere tricksters. Others are shifty and treacherous, like the hollies that move about too much. The oak and the pine and the elm are friendly, and you can always trust them absolutely. But there are others. She held up a warning finger, and Jimbo's eyes nearly dropped out of his head. No, she added in reply to his questions, you can't learn all this at once. Perhaps, she hesitated a little, perhaps, if you don't escape, we should have time for all manner of adventures among the trees and other things. But then we are going to escape, so there's no good wasting time over that. End of chapter 13.